I'm Emily Carter, 32, and for years I was the woman everyone overlooked at work, the one buried in late nights and forgotten credits. I thought the promotion meeting would finally prove my worth, but instead my own boss humiliated me in front of the entire room. What he didn't know was that I'd been planning for this moment all along, and his downfall was already written. By the time the CEO walked in with a sealed envelope, everything changed for him, for me, and for everyone in the room who laughed at me. The conference room was colder than usual, its air conditioning humming like a reminder that nothing here was ever meant to be comfortable. The long oak table stretched between us, polished to a shine that made the overhead lights glare against its surface. Around it sat the department heads and managers, their expressions a mix of curiosity, arrogance, and boredom, all pretending this was just another meeting. But it wasn't. For me, it was supposed to be the day my years of work finally meant something. I'd rehearsed my gratitude on the drive in, telling myself to keep it brief and professional. When the raise was announced, I'd thank him, my boss, James Calloway, with a simple smile. Then, the celebration would unfold. That was the plan. So, when the time came, I leaned forward slightly, folded my hands neatly, and said, steady and clear, "Thank you for the raise. I appreciate the recognition." For a second, I thought I saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes, as if he hadn't expected me to speak first. But then his mouth curved into that smile I'd grown to hate. The kind of smile that didn't just dismiss you, it reduced you. He leaned back in his chair, his tie loosened just enough to make his authority look effortless. And then he laughed. Not a polite chuckle, not even an amused grin. A laugh, sharp and cutting, like the whole room had been waiting for it. "What raise?" he said, voice booming across the table. "You're nothing here. Be grateful you even have a job." The words landed like a slap, but I didn't flinch. Around us, the others followed his cue. Some smirked, others outright chuckled, their eyes darting to me with poorly disguised satisfaction. In their world, mocking me was the safest option. James made sure of that. I kept my face neutral, my fingers laced together, as if I hadn't heard the cruelty dripping from his voice. Inside, I could feel the silence I'd trained myself to hold, the discipline to never give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. What none of them knew, not even James with all his smug certainty, was that I had no reason to defend myself. My defense was already waiting at the door. The sound came suddenly. A knock. 3 quick taps before the conference room door opened. Conversation died immediately, like oxygen pulled out of the air. Every head turned. The CEO, Victoria Hart, stepped inside. Her presence filled the room without effort, a tall figure in a slate-gray suit, posture as precise as the lines on her face. She carried a sealed envelope in one hand, the kind that promised someone's fate inside. She didn't glance at anyone as she moved toward the head of the table. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor, the only sound anyone dared make. James straightened in his chair, trying to recover from his laughter, adjusting his tie like a man preparing for a coronation. He didn't need to say anything. The smirk on his lips was loud enough. He thought this was his moment. Everyone in that room thought the same. The next director of operations, who else could it be but him? Victoria stopped, placed the envelope flat on the table, and cleared her throat. "We're here to announce the new director of operations," she said, her tone firm, professional, the kind that allowed no interruptions. The room leaned forward as one. I felt the tension swell, like the air itself was holding its breath. James allowed himself a wider grin, as though the victory was already his, as though my earlier humiliation had been nothing more than a final reminder of where I stood. Victoria broke the seal. The tearing of the paper was loud in the silence. She unfolded the letter inside, scanning it with a measured calm that betrayed nothing. Then she read the name. My name. The syllables dropped into the room with weight, cutting through every assumption, every smirk, every laugh that had dared to exist only moments ago. For the first time since I'd known him, James lost his composure. His face drained of color, the certainty that had wrapped around him like armor crumbling in a second. His mouth opened slightly, as though he might protest, but nothing came out. His silence was louder than his laughter had been. The applause began hesitantly, a few claps from the far end of the table, then growing louder until the room echoed with it. Managers who just sneered at me now looked as though they'd always believed in me. I rose from my chair slowly, steady, not rushing, letting every eye follow the movement they had never expected. Victoria extended her hand. I shook it firmly, my palm steady, my gaze locked on hers. She nodded once, then gestured toward the seat at the head of the table. James's seat. My seat now. I walked past him, close enough to feel the heat of his unraveling pride. His hand tightened around the edge of the table, knuckles white, but he said nothing. His silence was my proof. I sat down at the head of the table, the applause fading into the kind of quiet that waits for the next command. I let my eyes sweep the room, finally landing back on him. His jaw was clenched, his expression stripped of arrogance, replaced with the raw disbelief of a man who had thought himself untouchable. Still think I'm nothing? I asked softly, not loud enough for the others, but just enough for him. His laughter had died, and in that silence, I found my victory. The applause of that meeting still echoed in my head as I left the building later that day, but I didn't let myself linger on it. Victory in that room was only the surface. The truth ran deeper, built brick by brick long before the CEO opened that envelope. People believed promotions were handed out based on loyalty, seniority, or charm. What they didn't realize was that power lived in preparation. For years, I had prepared. For years, I'd studied not just my job, but everyone around me, their weaknesses, their patterns, the secrets they thought no one noticed. It began 3 years earlier, the day I realized James Calloway had no intention of ever letting me rise. Back then, I was still eager, still trying to impress. I'd taken on projects others avoided, stayed late without complaint, delivered results that saved him more than once. I thought eventually he'd see my worth. Instead, one evening, I overheard him in his office. His door wasn't fully closed, and his voice carried. He was speaking to another manager, laughing. She works hard because she thinks it matters. Let her. She'll never move up. Not under me. The words lodged in my chest, sharp and unforgettable. That night, something shifted. I stopped chasing his approval. I started building my own path. I began with observation. Every meeting, every offhand comment, every piece of gossip, I stored it. James liked to think he was unpredictable, but arrogance makes people sloppy. He repeated himself, recycled his strategies, relied on the same allies. He had blind spots, and I made them my map. The first real move came 6 months later. A quarterly report had errors, small but damaging. Instead of fixing them quietly, I traced the mistake back to one of James's chosen confidants. I documented everything, lined up the numbers, then handed the corrected version directly to the CFO with a calm explanation. I didn't embellish. I didn't accuse. I simply showed the truth. The CFO thanked me, and James's ally was quietly reprimanded. James never confronted me about it, but I saw the way his jaw tightened when the CFO praised my attention to detail in the next meeting. From then on, I operated carefully. I never struck directly at him. Not yet. I chipped away at his foundation, one brick at a time. When he dismissed other employees' ideas, I quietly helped those employees refine them, then slipped them into the right inboxes. Their successes reflected back on me, even if they didn't realize it. When budgets went missing details, I filled the gaps before senior leadership ever noticed. Each move positioned me higher without calling attention to the climb. But the true pivot came when I discovered his personal weakness. James had a brother, Michael, who owned a small business struggling to stay afloat. Few people knew, but one afternoon, while James barked orders down the hallway, I caught him on the phone, voice low and urgent. "I can't cover you this quarter. You'll have to figure it out." The desperation wasn't for his brother. It was for himself. His reputation in the company depended on appearing untouchable. If anyone connected him to financial instability, it would unravel the image he'd built. I didn't expose it. Not right away. Information like that wasn't ammunition you wasted on the first shot. Instead, I stored it, knowing there would come a time when leverage mattered more than proof. Meanwhile, I built alliances of my own. Not with loud promises or flattery. That was James's style. I listened. I remembered details others forgot. The head of HR mentioned once that her daughter was applying to colleges, worried about tuition. A week later, I slipped her a resource list for scholarships, saying I'd come across it. She never forgot. The finance manager struggled with software updates, so I stayed late one evening teaching him shortcuts. He remembered too. Piece by piece, I created loyalty that didn't need to be announced. All of this came together the year before the promotion. Victoria Hart, the CEO, had a reputation for sharp memory. She noticed the quiet ones more than the loud. I made sure she saw me not as ambitious noise, but as dependable precision. When she asked for updates, I delivered them before the deadline. When she posed questions in meetings, I had answers others didn't. I didn't try to impress her with speeches. I showed her consistency, and consistency built trust. Still, James didn't notice. Or maybe he noticed and refused to believe it mattered. His arrogance blinded him. He assumed senior leadership shared his contempt for me. He assumed loyalty flowed only to him. He assumed too much. The final setup began 6 months before the announcement. Victoria launched an internal review of department performance, subtle but thorough. It wasn't public, but whispers spread. I made sure my department's numbers shone. I streamlined processes, cut wasted hours, and documented every improvement. Then, when the review reached my team, the results spoke for themselves. James's numbers, meanwhile, suffered. He had spent too much time polishing his image, not enough strengthening the work beneath it. When Victoria compared the two, she didn't say anything aloud. She didn't need to. I saw the way her gaze lingered on my report longer than his. That was when I knew the envelope already had my name on it. But I couldn't risk arrogance of my own. I kept my head down, kept building, kept preparing. When the day came, when James laughed at me in front of everyone, I didn't fight because I didn't need to. The fight was already over. And when my name was read, his downfall was complete. But promotions are never the end. They're a shift, a doorway into a new room where the stakes are higher, the shadows longer, the knives sharper. Because here was the truth. James wasn't finished. Men like him never accept defeat quietly. They scheme. They look for cracks. They plot. And I knew the moment I took that chair at the head of the table, his mind was already turning, searching for a way back. What he didn't know was that I wasn't done either. I hadn't just planned for my rise. I'd planned for his retaliation. Later that week, the first test arrived. A small one, almost unnoticeable. A file went missing from my inbox, one I'd been expecting from finance. When I asked about it, the manager swore he had sent it. I believed him, which meant someone had interfered. Someone who wanted me to stumble. I checked the email logs. The message had been rerouted, not deleted, just delayed. A subtle trick. The kind James would use. I said nothing. I thanked the finance manager, smoothed the delay over with Victoria, and filed the knowledge away. He wanted to see if I'd panic. I didn't. The next week, another test. A rumor circulated that my promotion had come because of favoritism, that Victoria and I were secretly close. The whisper spread quickly, carried on the same voices that had laughed at me in the meeting. James's fingerprints were all over it. Again, I said nothing. I let the rumor burn itself out. Victoria wasn't a woman swayed by gossip. She dealt in facts. When she saw my results continue to rise, the whispers meant nothing. But these small strikes told me exactly what I needed to know. He wasn't going away. He was circling, waiting for a bigger opening, which meant I had to stay ahead. I pulled out the leverage I'd been saving. His brother's business. Quietly, I made calls. Not to expose James yet. Exposure was messy, final. Instead, I found out just how deep Michael's troubles ran. The debt was worse than I thought. Vendors unpaid, loans overdue, suppliers ready to walk. And James? He had been funneling favors through the company, pushing contracts toward businesses that connected back to his brother, hoping no one noticed the conflict of interest. Now, I had proof. And with proof came power. The question wasn't whether to use it. The question was when. Timing mattered. Too early, and I looked vindictive. Too late, and he might recover ground. So I waited. Because I knew, just as surely as I'd known the envelope held my name, that James would make his move soon. James's retaliation came faster than I expected. 1 month into my new role, he launched his attack openly, no longer hiding behind whispers or delayed emails. He filed a formal complaint with the board, accusing me of misconduct. He claimed my promotion had been secured through favoritism, that I had manipulated reports, that I was unfit for leadership. The board scheduled a closed session. Senior executives would attend. The outcome could stain my position permanently if I wasn't prepared. James knew this. He walked into that session with the swagger of a man convinced his downfall was temporary and mine inevitable. I arrived calm, because I wasn't surprised. I had been waiting for this moment. Victoria opened the meeting, outlining the accusations with her usual precision. James sat across from me, his soup crisp, his expression smug. She doctored numbers, he declared. She inserted herself into projects she didn't own. She built an illusion of success to secure a promotion that was never deserved. His words carried weight. Years of his dominance had taught people to take his confidence as fact. A few members of the board shifted uneasily, as though unsure who to believe. That was his strength, authority through fear. But fear only lasts until truth cuts it apart. When it was my turn, I didn't defend myself with speeches. I slid a folder across the table, neatly organized, each page a record of my work. Timelines, results, emails. Every claim he made unraveled with proof. Numbers aligned. Processes documented. Signatures included. My work spoke for itself. The room grew still. James's jaw clenched, but he wasn't finished. She had help, he said sharply. Unfair help. That's the only explanation. That was the moment I had been waiting for. I pulled out another folder. This one didn't hold my records. It held his. Vendor contracts. Payment trails. Evidence of deals directed toward his brother's struggling business. Invoices showing inflated numbers, favoritism disguised as coincidence. I laid them out one by one, the paper heavy in the silence. You say I manipulated the system, I said evenly. But these contracts tell a different story. They show conflict of interest. They show favoritism. They show negligence. The board leaned forward, eyes scanning the documents. James's face paled, just like it had when Victoria read my name aloud in the conference room. Only this time, there was no applause, no distraction. Only truth pressing down on him. Victoria didn't need to say much. She turned to him, voice clipped. You failed to disclose this? James stammered, searching for excuses. None came. His confidence collapsed in front of the very people whose approval he had always counted on. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The board moved quickly. By the end of the session, the complaint against me was dismissed. In its place, an internal investigation into his conduct began. He was suspended pending review. The man who once mocked me in front of a room full of people now left that building stripped of his title, his arrogance shattered. I watched him go without a word. That was my final victory. The aftermath unfolded quietly. His brother's business dissolved within weeks, debts too large to recover. Without James's influence, there were no contracts to save it. James himself vanished from the company's halls, his name erased from email chains, his office cleared in a single afternoon. Colleagues who once aligned with him shifted quickly, pretending they had never laughed at his jokes, never followed his lead. I didn't chase their approval. I didn't need it. I focused on my work, tightening processes, improving performance, ensuring my promotion wasn't just justified but undeniable. Within months, our department numbers exceeded expectations. Victoria made it clear in every meeting that her trust in me had been well placed. Yet the real satisfaction wasn't in the reports or the applause. It was in the silence. The silence where his laughter used to be. The silence that followed his name. The silence that proved the tables had turned completely. At home, I reflected on the years it had taken to get here. Every slight, every dismissal, every moment of being underestimated, they had built me into the woman who could outmaneuver him. If he had treated me fairly, I might never have learned to plan so carefully. If he had given me the raise I deserved years earlier, I might never have prepared for this day. His cruelty had been my teacher, and it had led him to his own undoing. I didn't celebrate loudly. I didn't boast. My victory didn't need noise. It lived in the chair I now occupied, the authority I now carried, and the knowledge that no one could ever call me nothing again. Months passed and the company moved on. New challenges came, new projects, new decisions. I faced them all with the same calm that had carried me through the storm. Some employees still whispered, but their whispers no longer had power. Results silenced doubt more effectively than words ever could. One afternoon, as I left the building, I caught sight of James standing across the street. His suit was wrinkled, his hair less polished, his posture heavier. For a brief second, our eyes met. He looked at me not with anger, but with something worse, recognition. Recognition that the game was over. Recognition that he had lost.